Hello, Mayor.
Good morning.
Good morning. Natasha, good to see you.
What's that, Alan?
I was just welcoming Tasha Lowry from Draper City.
Great.
I did a really nice job last week, Mayor. Appreciate your participation in the press conference and the important things that you shared. And having you there, I think, sent an important message.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed it, and it was good to get out, and it was a beautiful day, and really well done by Muriel and your team and everyone involved.
Yeah, Muriel and the X Factor Strategic Communications, they did a terrific job in preparing and helping to pull it off.
Yeah, it was great.
Thank you.
It looks like we've got Representative Stenquist that's joined us as well. Welcome.
And Alan?
Yes.
Jake's here. I'm going to be muting and turning my camera off here and there. We've got some cases on the rise, and my schedule's sort of been turned upside down a little bit this week. So I wanted to participate and listen in, but I'll be relying on Jake to fill me in after the meeting.
Okay. Be happy to do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
We certainly understand, and knowing the pressures and time commitments of elected officials, we will try to be efficient today and spend no longer than necessary. And maybe Senator Fillmore, I think we've probably got a good group here, and whenever you're ready, we can get going.
Yeah, thanks everybody for coming. We look forward to your continued feedback throughout this process. We know that it's a time commitment to come here and participate and help us generate ideas and help keep us on task and moving forward, and really help crafting the vision for what the point ought to be as it begins to develop. I don't see Mayor Ramsey here, Alan. I'm not. Do you know if she was planning to join us?
No, she indicated last week that there were a couple of things coming up, and she's been dealing with some family issues, so suggested that she may not be able to attend.
Right. Fair enough. But I do know that she sends her regards and her thanks as well. I'm going to let Alan kind of facilitate the meeting and guide the conversation so that we get the all the feedback on the right topics with Muriel's help. And Alan, do you want to just take it away?
Thank you, Senator, and appreciate your leadership. Again, we don't want to take too much time here, but I thought initially I'd give you a little update on some of the things that have happened over the last week or so, tell you where we are with some of the other working groups, and then we'll just kind of jump into some of the questions that we sent, and really want your input today on what you're hearing, where we are, and how we can address any concerns that are out there, or how we can do a better job of reaching out to your constituents. So as a first step, let me just talk a little bit about the press conference last week. I think many or all of you were there, so don't need to go into a lot of detail, but we got terrific coverage. I think over a dozen stories on all of the TV, paper, major radio stations in the state. We felt good about the coverage that we got. Appreciate very much those who participated. Lieutenant Governor Lowry Snow, Mayor, you were terrific, and appreciated you being there representing Salt Lake County. Of course, Teresa Foxley and Mayor Walker, I think, just did a really nice job of outlining what the thinking is at this point, what the process is, and really kicking off this planning phase. It's a big deal. We've been talking about this project for some time, laying a lot of groundwork, but to be actively starting the planning phase really is a key milestone, and a lot's happening along those lines. At the press conference, we announced that we are putting out a survey to gather public input. And we've had well over 1,000 responses in the first week, which is terrific. And one of the points I'd make is that we're not starting from scratch on public input. This has been going on for a number of years. The Point of the Mountain Development Commission ran the visioning process with scenarios and a number of public meetings. Over 4,000 people participated and weighed in on the concepts that they thought were most important to include. And so our work in this survey is really having the public weigh in again to confirm that those concepts are the priorities and help us prioritize within those concepts. So taking public input, taking the legislation that was created, and getting a little refinement from our public outreach. We're going to share that information with the planning team that's selected to help guide them in prioritizing some of the potential elements that would be included in a master plan. We also talked about the issuing the solicitation to select a planning team. And that initial solicitation went out a week ago last Friday. Yesterday, we had our first kind of formal event in that process. It was the pre-submittal meeting, a mandatory meeting for any of the planning firms that want to apply. And we had over 100 participants. Some of those were duplicative within firms. So I think, I don't have an exact number of the number of firms that are participating, but I think there were about 40 or so that expressed an interest in submitting an application, including a number of the world-class firms that we had targeted. So we feel like we've got a very good group to start with. We walked through the process with them. We talked a little bit about what we're trying to accomplish and answered a few questions. They'll be able to submit questions in writing until Thursday. We'll respond to those questions in writing, and then we'll be looking for their initial responses, kind of their statement of qualification that should come in the next about week and a half or 2 weeks. Then we've got a selection committee we're putting together. We'll narrow that list down to no more than 6. If we feel a need, we'll conduct interviews among those 6 with the goal of narrowing it down to 3 finalists. And then we'll go through a very detailed process with those 3 finalists where we give them much more information, including information from the working groups. We'll give them a scope of work. We'll ask them to come and visit the site, have some discussions with us about their ideas, our ideas. We'll let them know if we think they're on the right track. We'll bring them back again to present their final ideas, and then we'll select the firm by the end of the year. It's going to be a rigorous process, time-consuming, but it's so important. We want to do it right and want to make sure that the public ideas and concepts are included. So I will tell you that the working groups, including this one, gave us a number of concepts that they thought were really important to include in the plan. As part of our solicitation, we included statements of those priority concepts. And we've asked the firms to respond to their qualifications and ideas for addressing those concepts. We're going to score them heavily on their response to what we're calling the key vision elements. And I'll just tell you briefly, one was creating the iconic, vibrant, mixed-use community, focus on quality of life, balancing jobs, etc. Another was addressing transportation, high quality, future focused, multimodal transportation. Another one, and these all go into more detail, but promoting statewide economic development through job creation, workforce development, revenue generation, attracting top talent. 4 was advancing innovation, creating an innovation district, culture of creativity, helping early stage companies, etc. 5 was creating a model of sustainable development that reduces air emissions, water pollution, water and energy use, etc. And the final one that largely came out of this group, among others, was ensuring that we're coordinating with surrounding communities, ensuring that we're building this with the region in mind and connecting to regional transportation systems and understanding what surrounding communities are doing so that it's a good fit. So those were kind of the key vision elements, and again, came out of the working groups. I wanted to give you just a quick update on some of the other working groups before we move on. This one's a little different. You know, your elected officials, we're asking you to give us input on what you're hearing from your constituencies, how we can reach out and communicate more effectively. The others are looking at more detail in terms of substance, like what would the infrastructure look like? What are the key land use elements? What are the details of an innovation district? What's our economic development plan? And they went through the exercise of identifying, you know, the key concepts. And we've had most of those other groups working over the last month in subgroups, taking their top ideas and working in small groups to refine those ideas and give us a lot better sense for what they mean, what it would look like, what key alliances we need to build, what are key next steps. And so this week we'll be having those subgroups presenting to the full working group, having some discussion, and then helping us, again, put a little more meat on the bones of those ideas so that we can include it in the report that we'll create. It summarizes everything that comes out of the working groups, everything that comes out of the public survey, and can then hand that over to our successful planning team. So that's kind of where we are, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have on any of that. All right. If there aren't any, then I think the next step, and again, we'll take just as long as we need, but we thought it would be valuable to visit with all of you. You know, now that we've kind of done this public kickoff, now that there's been significant press about the project, and kind of get your input on what you're hearing, where we are, and what steps we ought to be taking that maybe we haven't been thinking about to this point. So maybe we'll just kind of work through the questions that we sent to you earlier. And the first is, what reactions have you heard to the press conference and announcement that we are launching this planning process? Has anybody talked to you about what's happening? Have they expressed any concerns about what we're doing, or things that they liked that we ought to be emphasizing?
Alan. Hi, this is Jeff Stenquist. I haven't heard anything. I think it's been kind of quiet, and I'm not really surprised by that. My experience in these land use planning processes has been that you can have open houses, you can do surveys, you can get all that kind of input, and people, I think, don't really understand that it's real and it's really going to happen. When people get involved is when the bulldozers show up and things start happening. Then they start wondering, well, what's going on over there on that piece of property that building is going up? They don't even realize, no matter how much, it's frustrating because it seems like no matter how much outreach, public outreach you do, people are kind of oblivious to what's going on until dirt starts to move. and at that point it's too late because the planning process is done and the time for input is past. So I mean, maybe I sound cynical by that, but I've just seen it happen many, many times. So that's not to say that I don't think that it's useful to go through the, I mean, the public outreach, all that kind of stuff, I think is invaluable. I think we can say, hey, we've been, I think that the people that are engaged and the people that are paying attention, I think really appreciate that. But it's just surprising how it's kind of out of sight, out of mind until until it's a little bit too late. But now I think there's probably a lot of people who didn't even realize that there was a new airport being built unless they'd been out there recently. Or I think there's a lot of people that don't even realize how far along the new prison is going because they don't see it every day.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Representative, and we've all seen that dynamic, and we're looking for it because this is our life right now, and so we've got a list of all of the media stories that came out about this. But as I see neighbors and friends and family, I think few of them noticed it. So it's important that we recognize what real people are focusing on these days, and there are plenty of distractions. So I think it's a good point. I take your point that it's still important for us to reach out and communicate, but you're probably right. We have to be prepared that when dirt starts moving, then there will be some more attention to this. But did anybody else get any feedback or have any sense for whether people are waking up to this project?
Yeah, I would just say that I've gotten the sense that Draper is cautiously optimistic. I think the press has been very positive so far, but there's an underlying vein of concern around this too, mostly to do with the traffic and the density, but there's also a lot of hope for it too. So they're watching and waiting.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that perspective. And Tasha, you're in a key position because you live in the community, you live nearby, as does Representative Stenquist. And so I appreciate knowing what the people of Draper are saying. I'm glad that they're open to the idea that this can be a positive thing. And we certainly understand some concerns. I think any of us would be concerned about a large development when we don't have control over it. If you're a neighbor, somebody else is making some decisions here that are going to affect me. I would expect that would cause some concern. But you mentioned traffic and density as being primary concerns you're hearing. Anything else?
Well, they're very hopeful about jobs. The economy has become even more front and center lately. And so the opportunity to be a catalyst here to bring more economic opportunity and give people more job prospects for the future, I think is something that's very appealing to them.
Thank you.
So, Alan, this is Dirk. This is Dirk again. So I've heard a few comments since the press conference, but it wasn't probably specifically dealing with the press conference from Bluffdale residents. And I find that the people who are a little further away in Bluffdale, who live on a little different bit of property than those who live closer, have more concerns than our residents who live on a higher density areas that are right adjacent to the prison property. Because as Bluffdale, is right next to the prison property. And so we have residents who are very close to the development or future development. And we found that the people of the Independence area, which is the point of the mountain area, is actually pretty positive about seeing development there. And I know from the past of dealing with those folks is as long as you keep them well informed, they're pretty accepting of what goes on. And that was the reason why Bluffdale City, as soon as we got that video, that we posted it on our website is because we know that if we just keep the public informed, they are more accepting than if they're surprised later. And so my recommendation, and it would be a very big help, I think, to all the surrounding cities, is if we could always get some kind of a something that we can continually post on our website and our Facebook pages that keep the public informed. You might not get a whole lot of feedback, but if you keep people informed, I'll tell you, it is so valuable to get that information out before than trying to get the information out later, because instead of doing the offense, you become the defense. And so in this process, if the cities can get, things that we can post that are professionally done, that are very informative, those flying cars, you can't imagine how much attention that got to the public, to where, maybe they wouldn't have even paid attention to it. But if it hadn't been for the cars, I don't know. But I did get a lot of comments about the cars from public and even the city council. So that would be my recommendation. Help us keep the public informed to the surrounding areas.
That's a great and important point, Mayor, and we'll certainly do that. We are putting out a number of pieces of information. We've got social media platforms, and maybe we can make sure that you have all of the links to those platforms, so that any member of your public who looks on the website can sign up and follow what we're presenting. We also are doing a monthly e-newsletter and have a list of over 1,000 contacts we're sending it to. I think we're sending it to the city, but I think we ought to make sure that that's going to the right people there, so that if you're interested, you could put that monthly e-newsletter on your website and people could see what's happened in the previous month and what they can expect in the coming weeks. So I think.
Yeah, one thing I should add. Sorry to interrupt. One thing I should add is the reason why I'm stressing the importance of making sure cities have that information, and that something specific is published to the cities, is because we actually use our CERT blocks. Our CERT blocks are very active, but we use them as public information also. And the blocks actually enjoy that, because not only does it give them a purpose of instead of standing by doing nothing, they stand by, passing out information, and it becomes very informative to the different blocks. And so our public information officer disseminates that information through the blocks, and then the block captains send that out to the individuals, and it gives them, some talking points. So, I just wanted to stress, having something published to the cities that we're authorized to use, and that is very informative and kind of, right to the point in very, very little, page turning, or maybe even no page turning.
That's great. I'm glad you shared that with us. We'll work with your staff and make sure that we get them the information we have and that they need. I think that's invaluable. Mayor, I was talking to one of your constituents who lives immediately west of the site, and she said her real issue is she wants to be able to someday get a job at a coffee shop on the point somewhere, and needs access to it. So she was hoping that there'd be some kind of a bridge from her neighborhood into the site. So we've logged that.
Yeah, she's probably from Springview Farms. I've had a few of those comments about trying to get across those tracks.
Right. It's a challenge. Anyone else have any thoughts on what you're hearing, concerns or feedback from the recent press? Okay. Okay. And curious about whether you've got any thoughts on additional steps we can be taking. Mayor, your input was great, but others, any other thoughts on things we ought to be doing in terms of outreach or communications?
One question. Do you think when you hire the consultant and you start getting more into the details of the plans, actually laying out some streets or that framework, I also think that may be a good time for the public to see it start to visually come to life. We'll probably get more increase there. I found that the public responds better to something that's proposed to them than more of an open, what should we do kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and I absolutely agree. And our thought is that once the master planning process starts, we'll have kind of key milestones along the way where we'll give the public kind of a peek into what the thinking is and what's happening and be able to get some midpoint input on it. So I like that idea. Thanks.
It's a really good point, Jake. And I think one thought that we explored initially was an online interactive map with a public comment layer. And we didn't ultimately include that with this statewide survey we're currently fielding because we don't have a plan just yet. But I think it's such a good point that once we get to the point where we have a draft master plan that our planning consultant team has helped us put together, something visual that the public can react to would be a really good thing.
Yeah, and I think more of those little things are going to come forward. You saw probably in the paper the other day that there is a small group from Draper very concerned about historic preservation. I think we're not quite there yet, but there are people that want to make sure that we are going to preserve something in the prison. I know there are also some concerns from our school communities about what education in the point is going to look like.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point too. And we did see the article about historic preservation, and we've had conversations with those folks, and I think we're very much open to seeing if there are elements that make sense to keep as for education purposes, for architectural purposes, maybe even as something that sets this site apart. So we'll continue to have those conversations, and they've been part of what our board has said. The point on the school, I think, is really well taken. Some of the first meetings I had was with leadership of the Alpine, Jordan, and Canyon school districts. And we've invited them to participate in our working groups and have been trying to continue to have conversations with the local school board members over this area. And so I appreciate your point and absolutely agree that as greater population comes in here, it'll have implications for schools, and we may need to think about whether there are schools needed within this site. So
do we set some land aside for school facilities? I do have a question. What school district is it in?
It's in the Canyons district.
It is in Canyons. Okay.
Yeah. But we want to.
Yeah, because it's within Draper city limits.
Okay.
All Draper.
So if we're really talking about density in there, we probably do need to make sure there's room to build some school facilities, right?
Right. And so some of my early conversations with them was that we were going to include them as we planned so that their needs are recognized and addressed. They weren't sure in, again, very early conversations, but thought maybe a need for an elementary school, but thought that they have the capacity at the middle and high schools to absorb the development of the site. But again, very preliminary, and I think we're going to have further conversations as we know better what will go on the site.
Yeah. I'm the liaison to our Parks and Trails board, and we've just started having preliminary conversations about what the connectivity to the trails will look like, or if there's the potential to build into the Galena Sukhanai Preserve over there to add in some hiking trails or something so that we can have options over there on that west side.
I'm glad that you've got that connection, because that's going to be really important. And folks on our infrastructure and land use team have been talking about the same thing. How can we tie in the Jordan River Parkway and some of the resources there? How can we tie into the Bonneville Shoreline Trail? We're talking to our transportation folks about active transportation, making sure that there are options for people to commute to and through the site, bicycles or walking or other active means. So yeah, if we can meet with folks on the trails board, or if they want to come forward with some specific ideas on how and where we could best connect, I think that'd be really valuable.
I think so too.
Kind of headed into the next question, which, we've talked about a number of ideas at our first couple of meetings, things that you wanted to see. We just raised a few here. I'm wondering if there are additional ideas or priorities that you've had that maybe we haven't captured yet that we ought to be thinking about. I heard flying cars loud and clear, but we'll see.
Alan, one thing that I've heard for many years, and I think is going to become a more important thing once this project develops, is just connectivity in Draper across I-15 for pedestrians and cyclists. Right now, it's really a challenge. Particularly where we have the front runner site over there by eBay, and if we have a lot of opportunities to go back and forth. If you're a pedestrian or a cyclist, you've got Bangor Highway interchange at 146. So you've got Bangor, you've got 146, you've got 123rd, which are all very busy intersections and freeway interchanges. And so something to get across the site. At one point, I think that there was talk of having some sort of a bridge, either a pedestrian bridge or or even an additional overpass at 138th, because there's like literally a direct alignment of roads on both sides of the freeway at 138.
Yeah, I recall that. As part of the Development Commission work, they put together a report on transportation ideas, and they had a chapter on active transportation.
Yeah.
Looking at those issues, and identified a number of opportunities to make it safer to get from one side of the freeway to another, to get through Bangor, et cetera. And I recall that they were looking at an underpass or overpass at 138th.
Yeah.
So,
I think it also kind of ties into how we get tracks across there. And, certainly if there was a tracks overpass, which would be, I'm sure, massive and expensive, that you could easily tag on a pedestrian sidewalk on that.
Right. Yeah, I think that's an opportunity. And right now they're looking at that tracks or transit extension to go roughly through 146 South. Yeah, if it's light rail, it would probably have to go up and over the freeway. If it's bus rapid transit, they may be able to bring it under the existing opening in that underneath the freeway. But those are things they're looking at. But I agree with you. I think we likely will have some kind of transit through the site that'll open up some trail opportunities. There are existing canals, 2 different canals that go through the site, and those present opportunities for trails as well that could be connected not just on the site, but regionally. Yeah, good points.
Have you looked at all into recycling of the prison materials? I realize it's kind of a detailed question, but it's something that should be looked at before the demo happens. So if all that concrete or asphalt is staying on site and recycled and used as road base or anything like that. I'm just curious if that's been looked at yet.
We haven't looked at it in detail. I know the concepts come up, and I know that at least one or two of our working groups, the subgroups that have been talking, have identified that issue. So I think it's something that is entering our radar screen. It does make sense. Let's use the materials that are on that site, and if we can save some money and avoid creating additional waste, that's to our advantage. Any other ideas that we haven't talked about that we ought to throw into the mix? Okay. And, I think the last question is kind of redundant of some of the things we've talked about today, but as we think about where we're heading in terms of process, so not just what we see at the site, but in terms of process, any advice that you have? So especially as we think through the end of the year, we've kind of walked through it and said that for the balance of the year, we'll be focusing on getting the right planning firm in place. And in a couple of weeks, we'll receive our applications. We'll spend about a week reviewing those, and the selection committee will narrow the field to no more than 6. Then potentially have some interviews, get 3 finalists, go through 2 charrette processes, one where they see the site, give them information, outline our scope of work. Number 2, where we bounce ideas around and tell them, we like that direction, we don't like that direction, you might want to change. And then the 3rd, they come back and make a presentation to us, tell us how much they're going to charge, tell us who their team members are going to be, and then we try to get the contract signed and get them moving. We will use the input from the working groups, including this one, in informing that process and outlining the scope. So any thoughts on that, how we can best take advantage of the process, or anything else that we ought to be aware of?
Alan, do you guys have a score sheet for how you're going to rate consultants?
We do. We've been through a pretty detailed process with DFCM and put together a score sheet for the first stage, where we narrow it down to the 3 finalists, and then a second scoring matrix for the final 3. And we're looking at things like their qualifications, what we hear from the owners of previous projects they've worked on, the teams that they put together, how easy and good they are to work with, and a lot of points on the key vision elements that have come out of our working groups. We want to see how they would address those priorities and what creative ideas they come up with. So we're not necessarily asking these 3 finalists to come up with a final plan, but we really want them to spend a lot of time being creative and share with us their vision, their approach, and some iconic things we might be able to do on the site.
Having been through several charrettes that I would prefer some of them to undo and have that time of my life back, there is a risk to fall for the shiniest pony in some of these charrettes, or at least in some of these processes. I do think there is a value to having a local experience, I guess. And I assume that might be part of your criteria. one thing that I found valuable in these packets as I prepared the phasing, because you said it was DFCM was the department you worked with. It was.
That's right.
Up with a questionnaire. Bless DFCM's heart, they've actually never done this before.
Well, they haven't done quite this. They've done some other projects, the U, where they've brought in planning firms to do some creative designs, and so they've had some experience with the concept. But I really like your point, Senator, that there is a tendency to look at the Emerald City, you know, who's got the coolest plan that stirs the juices. And one of the elements we've included is feasibility. We want them to make sure that what they're providing is feasible, technically and financially. One of the things we talked about yesterday with all of the groups that chimed in was one of the reasons we haven't asked them to put their teams together up front is because we thought if there are 40 teams scrambling for local subs,
yeah,
then you lose some of the opportunity to get the locals in. So just the final 3 are going to put their teams together. And we mentioned that having some local expertise, whether it's the lead or some of the subs, is certainly going to be important because they understand the culture, the politics, the values, and that needs to be incorporated into this project.
As probably the only person on this call that's probably worked with all of those locals, I'm happy to provide feedback based on what you think those teams can accomplish versus what they can't. So that might be one component. The other part of this is, you know, what we end up delivering will obviously come down to the discipline of whomever we decide is going to be the kind of the town architect, right? This is, you know, a constant struggle. You know, the bottom line and the underwriting versus, you know, the town architect. I mean, if you talk to Kennecott, they, you know, at Kennecott, but even now Varde and talk to, you know, the land group at Varde with Ty McCutcheon and Stephen James. You know, Stephen is beloved internally and working on things, and hated externally for several things. But the one thing I really love about the guy is he's very disciplined about what he sees and the way that it's going to be implemented. And so as important as the consultant is making sure that whomever is going to be the eventual architect is somebody that we're disciplined and willing to, because the shiny pony doesn't necessarily just apply to architects. It applies to users who show up and think that they are going to rewrite and tell you how something's going to be different. And, you know, there's nothing like, you know, and I take this for what it's worth. I had a project in Phoenix, very, you know, similar as far as its geolocation to the Metro Phoenix area. It was a 1,100 acre property. And we, you know, went through charrette planning, everything else, went through, had a buy-in on everything else, and our agreements were in place. And then we had a user show up, and everybody lost their mind because they wanted a, you know, 1.5 million square foot building with Amazon. And it had a, you know, I tell you that just having been through that experience now, gosh, I've been at this for 15 years on large land projects around the country. And, you know, that discipline has a way of chucking itself out the window. So anyway, I figured I better say something or else I shouldn't come to the meetings.
So I could make a few comments. This is Steve Kellenberg. I'm the director of.
By the way, Stephen, I was really excited when they hired you. I have.
Well, you just put 500 pounds on my back. So
No, that's great. I've worked with and I've modeled a lot of the things that we have done at the church's investment portfolio after concepts that the Irvine Company has done, and you know, we own some land obviously in the Irvine area, and you know, have had to work closely with the Irvine Company in several issues, including on panels with ULI and other elements. You and I haven't necessarily met yet, but honestly, it's Irvine is a standard really for a lot of people, and so I appreciate your time and experience.
Well, just two quick comments on what you're saying. First of all, you know, I think we've the point system that's been set up for selecting, and as well along with the selection committee, I think by definition are going to help us not fall for the shiny object. It's a fairly convoluted, you know, point system with a lot of points on content. And in our pre-submission meeting yesterday, I stressed the point that when we get down to the final three and we have this little competition, that it's not about the master plan. It's really it's only like, it's not 90% about coming up with a master plan in a competition like you often see. It's about half about coming up with an urban design framework at a high level, but the other half is really going to be about innovation and a thought process that really focuses on the vision points and showing us that they actually bring more than just fancy drawings. And the other comment on the point about, you know, that's one of the reasons we call this a framework plan rather than a detailed master plan, is we know that's exactly what's going to happen, that we're going to have a framework plan and there's going to be a big user that comes in. I went through this with Microsoft when I was at the Irvine Company. I mean, we spent a year and a half doing a 1.2 million square feet campus for Microsoft, and then they walked away because they made they changed their strategic business plan for that year, you know. And so you just have to have a plan that has the flexibility to allow those types of things to come in and plug and play or not and still maintain its integrity. And that's our philosophy, and I think that will serve us well as we go through probably a couple of cycles in building out this place.
Okay. Well, thanks, and really appreciate your perspective, Senator, not just from your elected standpoint, but from your professional standpoint. And we'll want to continue to draw on that expertise. I think we've kind of wrapped up the questions. We'll want to give you an opportunity to see if there's anything else you think we ought to be aware of at this point, but we don't want to take any more time than necessary. All right. Well, Senator Fillmore, I think we've got some really good input from this working group today, and appreciate very, very much your interest in the project and sharing your expertise and the things that you're hearing. You're our eyes and ears in the community. We are just absolutely committed to doing this right. It's something that drives us, and we may stumble along the way. If we do, it's unintentional. But you can help us identify some of those potential challenges and address them early and in the right way. So just can't thank you enough for your contributions. Senator Fillmore?
Yeah, I echo that. We do have a commitment to do this in the right way, and so we're relying on you to get feedback from your communities. And we thank you for being here and providing that feedback to us.
Great. So until next time, I'll just say we'll continue to take the input we've got. At our next meetings, we'll probably have a draft outline of a report that we'll provide to successful planning team and seek some input on that. But with that as the goal, I think we're done. Thank you.
Okay, thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.